Today on the show, we're answering your questions.
Questions about burnout, questions about bilingual church social media strategies, and everything in between.
Let's dive in.
Well, hey there, and welcome to the Pro Church Tool Show. We're here to help you and your church navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. I'm Brady, your host. I'm joined as always by my co-host. We regrettably call him Bishop Butter. It's Alexander Mills.
Hello.
And today we're answering your questions. We've got Reverend Randomizer here. He has, unbeknownst to me, randomized the questions that y'all sent in. We're here to answer them. Reverend Randomizer, take us away.
That's right. I've randomized 14 questions. So first question coming in hot. It says, hey, how should bilingual churches post on social media? For example, if they have a flyer that's in both Spanish, or in my case, Haitian Creole, and English, so two separate graphics, should they post the graphics separately with their respective captions, or should they post it at once so then there's two slides? Does it differ from platform to platform? What do you think?
Well, let's go platform by platform. I think this person has already considered a lot of the different options, and the answer that they probably don't want to hear is that it's kind of like multi-campus ministry. There's no like perfect way that's like, hey, all bilingual churches or all my multi-campus churches should approach social in this way. So let's imagine that you are on Instagram. The nice thing about Instagram is it does have carousels. So you could do two different slides, and then in the caption, you could have two different captions.
Yep.
I think that's a perfectly suitable option. Then when you go to Facebook, you're presented with a little bit more of difficulty. What you could do there is English caption and Spanish caption, one image, and then first comment, you could put the secondary image. You could also queue it up where it's English caption or language one caption, language one image, and then in the first comment, language one or language two image and language two comment, if that makes sense. I don't think that there's like a perfect way of doing this because social isn't really set up for this. Obviously, the other option is you break up the socials into multiple accounts. And then you get the downside of your church engagement is kind of split between two. And so you're not seeing as much traction on social because you're kind of having it. That really is just there to illustrate that there's no perfect solution. I don't know if you have any additional thoughts.
Yeah, I think that probably speaks to most of it. Just beyond the fact that like it is so contextual, because maybe your social strategy for how you talk about these events can mirror like how you talk in these two languages in your church. So I can't speak to that like specifically because I don't know, but at least consider that. Like, okay, how do we use these two languages in our church? And that may give you a little bit of personal insight or context-specific insight into how you should do that on social.
I love that. So if you're a church, bilingual church, and you have Spanish service and English service, I would say then that suggests having two distinct social accounts would probably be best.
Right.
Whereas if you are a church that like, I don't know if that right word is simulcast, but like you have the listening devices where people can hear, then having them in the same social would make sense, because in person, you've decided, yes, we have different languages in this room, but we all want to be in one room. So then, yeah, let that carry over to social. I'm so glad that you brought that up, versus if you're already like, no, we have our English speaking service, we have our Spanish speaking service, then on social, separating them. We know one bilingual church where there are literally two people at the pulpit. There's the pastor, and he will say a line, and then the Spanish interpreter, she will say the line. And so if you're going to do it that way, then yeah, keep it all on one social account. That's great.
And even one step further, I did not expect to spend this much time on this question, but it also sets the right expectations for first-time visitors. So you and I were just traveling this past weekend. We're in Montreal, which is like famously a French-speaking part of our English nation, and predominantly English nation. And I was looking for a church to go to on Sunday, and the church that I ended up going to, it's a rather large church, it's a popular church, but their website was in English, so that set the expectation that when I went, the service would be in English, whereas there was another church I was looking into, the Cathedral of Notre Dame, and all of their printed material, all their stuff online was in French, so that set my expectation. It's like, oh, they might have an English mass, but I should be expecting French. Next question.
What are you laughing at?
Just right into the personal stuff. Where do you get all the wisdom for naming your co-host Alex on the show?
You included that one?
You told me to include this one.
I said that in jest. The Jesuit jester over here.
Well, let's pull the curtain back. Sometimes, like today, you don't have to deliberate. That just comes right to you. But other times, we go to hit record and you're like, I don't have a name for you. So you have to search in your memory of what's a recent shared experience we have and come up with something clever. But the audience should know that this is like, and I think it probably comes from maybe it's a God-given gift. Maybe it's grace. Maybe it's also the fact that you predominantly listen to hip hop music. So that there's like a lot of rhyming schemes, but this is something that you really excel at, which is coming up with like, cause it's not just me coming up with like clever alliteration, often humorous in nature. It brings joy and levity to our workspace.
Hey, if it's often humorous in nature, then we're pretty happy with that. Pull back the curtain even more. When we were first starting this, I needed like a consistent archive to make sure like it was sustainable. I wasn't sure like, could I come up with a new one?
It's been years now at this point.
Right. And the nice thing is now that we have guests, I don't have to come up with a new one every single time. You'll notice that we don't start off our guests like, well, esteemed pastor and doctor of theology is with us. But before we get to that, Bishop Butter is like, okay, I don't kick them off that way when we have a guest. So I'm doing them less frequently. But some of my best inspiration for these has come when I'm just laying in bed and I can't fall asleep. I'm just like, Bishop Butter.
Brittany's trying to whisper something in your ear. You're like, no, not right now.
No, like I'm locked in. He's the Reverend Randomizer. And I'm writing them down in Slack so that I remember them for future episodes. I had an entire note in Evernote at one point that was in my private folder.
So I couldn't see it.
Alex couldn't see it.
We just came into the studio off the heels of a very heated discussion about that involved butter. And so that's where Bishop Butter comes from.
Yes, and that, depending on what footage may or may not get used, will perhaps show up in an episode of Pro Church Tools Inc., which is it's the plug for our new YouTube series where we are tracking as we build 1,000 free church website makeovers before the end of 2025. I made that announcement, and the reception's been really great. So thankful that everyone's enjoying it. And so we encourage you, go over, check those videos. The first 3 should be out now. Yesterday's episode was titled The Best Church Websites of 2024. And the idea with these is like every single video, every single episode in this series, Pro Church Tools Inc., is going to have kind of a core content idea. So for those that have subscribed, the 150,000 or so that have subscribed to our YouTube channel because they're like, hey, I want to learn about helping my church navigate this communication shift. We're still going to do that, but we're also having additional segments and additional chapters. If you're curious about Montreal, a big part of that video, the best church websites of 2024, that's kind of how I kick off the video. That's like the first chapter. And then we get into why we went to Montreal and what we got into and Alex's visit to St. Patrick's Basilica.
That's right. What's literally crazy is that I truly put all these questions in the randomizer. And the next question is, speaking of our trip to Montreal, what's the best food in Montreal?
Okay, the best food. So where
do we even start?
We were so happy that we were able to book reservations at the #1 rated restaurant in Canada for how many years? 6 years running. So it's called Mont Lapin, which translates to
My Rabbit, which is a little less refined. We got the menu, and the menu is all in French, so we pulled out Google Translate, and it says Mon Lapin right on the top. It's like, it's a nice typeface is looking. We pull up Google Translate, and it just says My Rabbit. It's like, it loses some of the.
We knew that's what it meant, but it's just kind of funny with Google Translate. So that I'm looking at this menu, and it changes every day. So the menu has the date on it, and I'm looking at it, and our wonderful server comes by. This is kind of our first interaction, and he's like, "Yeah, put away Google Translate. Just let me do my job." And I was like, yes, sir.
Yeah.
How about you talk about Mont Lapin?
I've talked about it a lot since our trip, and we've only been home for a few days. And the way I describe it is you and I have shared a lot of great meals together, a lot of renowned restaurants, not just in Canada, but around the globe.
Spoiler alert. This is our best one that we've ever had together.
Exactly. So we have on this list, Canada's 100 best. In Niagara, we have what was formerly #5, slipped to #6.
Yikes.
And that's it's called Restaurant Promoset, a very traditional, like French restaurant, French cuisine, but French atmosphere. There's like expectations of what you should wear, expectations of how you should behave. It's a very refined atmosphere, which, as I've learned now since being to Mont Lapin, it's the lens by which you experience the whole thing. So like, of course the meal is great and the food is great at Restaurant Promoset, but of course it was because everything felt great. Mont Lapin, what's so impressive about how phenomenal that meal was and how it marked us is that they pulled it off in the most casual atmosphere you could imagine.
That was the juxtaposition.
It's not like it was like sloppy or goofy. It was just casual. You could relax. It didn't matter what you were wearing. It didn't matter how you behaved in a sense. You could be loud, you could be quiet. You didn't have to feel refined. Our server was top tier. The guy just wanted to have a good time and made sure that we had a good time. There was very little pretense. but it was they pulled it off somehow. One of the best dining experiences I've ever had in a really surprisingly casual atmosphere.
Right. You think about restaurants that are going to be ranked really high or have Michelin stars, and we've been to those. Like sometimes they're stuffy, and that can be great,
Sure,
depending on what you're into that night. We had a long travel day, and basically what happens was we sit down and I'm breaking out Google Translate because I got to figure out like what is this menu all about. The champagne list was 15 pages on its own. Then there was the wine list and the drink list, and I'm like, okay, well, how am I got to figure out what this food is. And before I can even like get too deep into Google Translate, he slanders me. But then he goes, what are you guys like trying to get into tonight? And we're like, oh, we're here from out of town. It's gonna be great. And he's like, how about I take care of you tonight? And I was like, you know what?
I need to be taken care of.
It's been a long time since somebody's taken care of me. I'm always taking care of others. You're going to take care of me? He's like, I'm going to take care of you. He takes everything off the table.
He took care of us. He wouldn't even let us look at the menu.
He's like, don't worry about it. We're just going to have it happen to you. And it was outstanding. I think the standout dish, which I've since described to somebody, and he was quite repulsed by it. And as I described it, I was like, I guess that does sound kind of weird. Yeah. Think of a grilled cheese. Okay? You're thinking of it? Except it's not cheese. It's scallops.
I mean, that's how I would describe it too.
Which, yeah, it seems like maybe a bit of a downgrade, I suppose. But it was one of the most divine things I've ever had.
The most memorable bottle of wine I've had in a long time. Mexican red wine.
A Mexican red wine that almost tasted like it was injected with mezcal.
Yeah.
Mezcal is a very, it's kind of like, the sister of tequila. Except it's very smoky. One of my favorite mezcals, the tasting note was once described as burning rubber.
Yeah, classic.
It was like that in a wine, which again might be a turnoff for some, not for you or I.
Yeah.
And we also had some guinea fowl.
Cooked 3 ways.
Outstanding. Just an amazing meal. We then went to the number 8 rated restaurant in Canada, which is Beba, B-E-B-A. We went to the number 13 rated restaurant, which was Montreal Plaza. So those were our 3 evening dinners. And then during the day, we sampled the kind of highest rated restaurants for Montreal's iconic dishes. So bagels, poutine, and of course, Montreal smoked meat.
Yeah.
My deepest sympathies to those that live on the island of Manhattan in New York City, but I got to side with my French Canadian counterparts. I think their brisket is just a little different.
Yeah, we really did experience the spectrum of like Montreal cuisine, which is like the best, like literally number 1, and then just the classics that you walk into on the side of the street, and it was just phenomenal.
Look, there are a few things that I've been taught by my food eating mentors over the years. I'm going to share 3 of them with you. Now, one of them is mine, and 2 of them I've been taught. Okay. The first one is when you really want to make it a special night out, you don't start with a bottle of wine. You start with a cocktail, and then you get into a bottle of wine. This has been reaffirmed multiple times over the years, but the first time I learned this, I was like, you just changed the game.
I remember where we were when we learned that, and it really did. It altered the course of our dining experiences.
This is why you need older mentors to show you the way, because we are, not infallible. And this guy knew that. He's like, I think we should start with a cocktail, guys. And I was like, yeah. He's like, then we could probably get some wine. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
He's like,
I was in for 1 drink that night. He's like, no.
He's like, then maybe like a dessert wine. I was like, okay. He's like, and then a digestive. And I was like, this man is casting a vision. And what was great was we were there for 4 hours.
Yes.
And, everyone's interest in drinking alcohol is going to be a bit different, but like it was done so tastefully. Like even you hear that from the start and you're like, okay, like that's a lot. Like I'm not here to like feel anything. Like that's not how I like to drink my alcohol. And, we were perfectly sober and 100% great the whole night, which is what you want. That's lesson number 1. Okay. Cocktail before the wine. If you're into drinking.
Sure.
If not, that's totally fine. These next 2 will be for you. The second one is just order the whole menu. So this was an introduction to me last year, okay? I'm in Vermont, and I'm at this, like, Lebanese joint. And I'm like, oh, there's a lot of labna on here and, chickpeas. And so, my food mentor here, shouts to him, he goes, yeah, we'll just get the menu. And I was like, what is happening? And the waiter, without skipping a beat, was like, very good. And then for the next 3 hours, just kept us bringing every dish. And it's like he was tailoring it to how many people we were.
Right.
And it was like, this was a place where sharing was a thing. So you can't do this at every place. I would not recommend you walk into Cheesecake Factory and try this. So you kind of have to know the right place. And perhaps I messed this up, and we've gone very long on this question, but now I just can't stop talking about it. We were at Beba, the number 8 rated restaurant. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to try this here.
It was a short menu. It was reasonable. It wasn't like...
And there was 4 of us,
Yes.
and there was 3 courses, and each course had 4 things. So I was like,
it's like,
perfect.
great.
And I go, we'd like to have the menu.
And she laughed.
We'll take all of it. And this server looked me in the eye. And at the end of the meal, she told us how she really felt, but she was like laughing. She's like, what do you mean the whole thing? I was like, well, there's 4 of us. There's 4 of each thing. And I was starting to feel some friction. And I was like, this is supposed to be kind of a power play. This isn't really going off how I want it to go. At the end of the meal, she goes, did you guys like it? And I was like, yeah. She's like, did you have enough food? Because we ended up ordering everything but like 1 thing or 2 things.
Yeah.
She didn't talk us down that much.
Yeah.
We could have eaten those 2 things.
We could have.
And she's like, because when you guys said that at the beginning, like I looked at you, points at me. She's like, he's a child.
Oh, no, you didn't tell me she said that. I missed that.
You missed that?
I missed that. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, she looked me in the eye. She said, this man is a child.
As you're filling in your tip.
Yeah. She power played me.
That's crazy.
So that's the second thing. This is kind of like handing the maitre d' the tip in hand to get seated faster. Like, clearly be careful with it. And I'm working on it still. I guess I was a little too eager. Third thing is what Alex mentioned, experience the spectrum in a city. So the first time I did this was in San Diego, and I was with an employee, and we were at a beach club, and we had fish tacos, and each taco was like $40. And it was like the highest end of tacos, and they were like, yeah, we caught this morning, and blah, blah, blah. That's one side of the spectrum. In the same day, we went to Petco Park, where the San Diego Padres play the game of baseball. And it was $2 Tuesday on Taco Tuesday.
Yeah.
We'd call that Toonie Tuesday here in Canada. And him and I each had 10 tacos each. Let me tell you, not the highest brow version of taco,
Right.
but equally good.
Yeah.
You get it, the highest end and the dirtiest version. And they're both like, hey, you have your place in my life.
That's right. Okay, we mentioned it briefly earlier. The new YouTube series on the main channel, on the Pro Church Tools channel, is marking 10 years of Pro Church Tools as a company. So this question comes in, 10 years of Pro Church Tools. If you could go back, what would you do differently as a team?
I'd probably install values earlier. When did we install values?
The first version, like within the last 2.5 years, maybe.
Right.
And then we've updated them once or twice since.
Right. So that means like 75% of our company's lifespan living without formally stated values. And the thing about vision and values for your church, for our organization, for any family, is that values will be defined. They're either going to be defined by you or they're just going to be defined by life's happenings.
Yes.
So if you don't have formally stated values, informally stated values will invent themselves. And so I think that language has become really important to us in the last couple of years. I wouldn't say that like we were without a rudder in the previous, 7 or 8 years, but seeing how often we cite those values and how frequently we use that shared language to tackle challenges and to approach problems and to navigate different tension points probably feels like having them earlier would have been great.
So like in theory, I agree, but in practice, I think a lot of those values came out of the experience that you gained over the first 5, 6, 7 years. So it's one of those things where it's like, oh yeah, I would have loved to like know this from the beginning, but could you have known this from the beginning? I'm not confident about that.
Let me ask you this. You have parenting values.
Yeah.
Your children are young. So baby's coming out of the womb and you've got like the 10 Commandments ready to hand them? Yes or no?
Yeah, I'm just trying to discern if that is like apples to apples. I actually, someone was just asking me recently, actually, I think on our Montreal trip, just asking, oh yeah, it was on the Montreal trip. One of the guys is about to become a new dad. And he says like, what do I need to know? And I was just telling him like our story and saying like, oh, I actually think we had a bit of a leg up before we had our own kids because my brother had 4 kids before we had any. And my wife's a midwife, so she's got like the newborn thing down. And we also fostered kids before we had any of our own. So I think before we had any, we had some experience that kind of gave us the opportunity to mine out some values.
Sure.
So I think that's how that worked for us.
Right. So you're saying like you had that experience just in like slightly different permutations of parenting that allowed you to gain the knowledge. Yeah, it's true. Because I mean, we started this company, I was 23 years old, and there's that saying, you don't know what you don't know. So how could you install values without first going through the challenges to realize the need for them? We've had some people ask us like, how do you figure out values? And I was like, yeah, every time I've created a value, it's because I like went through something and I was like, that's going to happen again.
Right.
We need a clear roadmap for how to tackle it next time because we were just winging it and we got through it, but like it probably took longer or was a bit more painful or a bit more messy than it needed to be.
Yeah.
So that's fair. That's fair. There are things that we could have done earlier as a team. I always struggle with this type of question because I can tell you like these are the things that worked really well for us. And there are some like things like, oh, you know, we hired an accountant and he ghosted us.
Right.
And that led to like some annoying financial things. But like,
So not hire that accountant.
yeah, sure.
Right.
That. But like, it wasn't like it was like my buddy Tim, right? Like it was a reputable accountant who had great online reviews and was like part of a firm. And I guess the firm dissolved or, hey, let's hope he's alive.
Yes.
Because literally just disappeared. But that became an important lesson learned. Okay, when we evaluate and hire our next accounting firm, what do we need to look for? And so we like made purposeful choices, learned out of the lessons we learned from that experience. So that's what is really tricky about looking back and saying you wish you did it differently. But I think the heart of the question is people asking like, not like, hey, if you did it all over again, you'd be like, oh yeah, Bitcoin. Like, I don't think that's the heart of the question. The heart of the question is you learn valuable lessons through difficult times. What could I know to maybe avoid those difficult times? Because we're all going to face tough times and learn lessons from them. But if you could avoid some, like, and not only have tough times, that would be good. So maybe the only other one that comes to mind, and as I've answered this on podcasts before, is like, I really neglected my family a lot at the beginning of the business. I didn't have kids really through all of it, but even our first child, like I just wasn't as involved as I am now with our second child. But then what I've always said on podcasts is that when you're building something from scratch, like there are busy seasons and there are seasons where like you're grinding away. And if you look at all of human history, you know, not every parent has been able to either like contribute to earning income for the family or contribute in the home. And not every family has had like the perfect balance. Sometimes you're just like, we're just trying to like make it.
Yeah.
And at the beginning, that was all we were trying to do. And eventually we got to the point where it's like, we're okay. And if you keep working this hard, it's actually not, you can't do it under the guise of like, I'm doing it for the family. Now you're just like, oh, build an empire, build my empire. It's like, no, those aren't our family values. So now that you've built it, either learn to delegate or say enough is enough because this cannot go on indefinitely. But I got asked on a podcast, the guy said like, great, I'm so glad you're modeling this. Like you built this business and you didn't neglect your family. I was like, well, to be clear, there was definitely a season where like relative to what I would want, my own standards, I neglected my family. It was that season that built the business.
Right.
I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
But that's just really honest.
Yeah. And that's like, it's not unique to like tech or startup. Like that's, and even still like in, you know, I'm thinking about hunter-gatherer societies where like traditionally like men would like be away for seasons to hunt and gather food and like, but even still like in modern agrarian households, for the folks who are like actually tending the land, like according to the actual seasons outside, there are like very busy seasons and seasons that are not so busy. So it's like, that's not unique to like internet work or like startup work. My question for you is like, so it's been 10 years, like a decade. At what point do you think you got like a handle on that work-life balance? Not to say that there aren't still busy seasons where you have to like double down, but like at least you could identify it. And you mentioned the word value again, like had a set of values that it's like, okay, we value the business, but we also value what's going on at home. Like when do you think that like you kind of found some homeostasis in the journey?
Yeah, I'd say the first efforts were probably made about halfway through, so 5 years in. And I'm actually like evaluating this not through how I felt, but actually like the health of my wife. Right. Because for me, like when I was just working and grinding, one, I am still, but even more so then, was young. So I didn't really know like, oh, I could actually be a lot more involved in my child's life. I was just like, hey, I'm having fun building this thing and we're going to build it. It's like when you play a video game, you're just like, oh, what time is it? Like, I've just been working on this for the longest time. Until eventually it became clear, okay, my wife's like not in the best place. So then that was about 5 years ago. And that also coincided with when our first went off to school. So that was something that I didn't control, but provided us with a bit more margin already. And then I think we felt that margin and we're like, oh, margin. Can we create more of this? And that was when I got really serious about, okay, what is the trajectory for our company? What are we trying to do? What are some things that might get in the way? And guess what happened right around then?
Got a breakdown.
Global pandemic. And what that also did was that allowed me to like reflect in a new way. And I don't know if people might remember, like, we didn't like publish a podcast for like 6 or 9 months, and like content like virtually went silent. And that was basically me being like, okay, what happens if this turned off? What happens if this like went away? And what do I need to do? And what do I want to do? And what is best for my family? And just, it gave us the freedom to ask all of those questions. And that happened for a lot of people, right? Like they're like, wait a minute, why am I working this amount when I've experienced something different? And out of that came the wisdom and lessons to be able to output just as much as before, but not demanding as much input. And here we are 5 years later, we're doing a podcast. We have an entire YouTube video series. We're publishing, every other day with carousels and reels. What that means is that's all different content formats. Previously, it was like one blog, one podcast, and like hopefully some social. And now we're doing all of it with like extremely different creative requirements for each platform. And we're doing a lot more, but we're doing it, for me at least, with a lot less required of me, which makes it sustainable. Now, No Weeks Off is doable for me too.
There you go. Okay, next question is also about a podcast. So they say, we've had our podcast called The Round Table for over 2 years. We have over 150 episodes and we drop a new one weekly currently. We have this podcast hosted on Apple, Spotify, and on their own channels and our church's YouTube channel. As we are diving into more analytics and looking into finding more ways to push our podcast out, should we look into creating a new YouTube channel for our podcast, or do we keep it where it is?
So it sounds like it's on their existing
That's
church
what it sounds
channel.
like, yeah.
So most of the time when I get asked this question, I tell a church it's based on kind of where your channel is right now. If your channel is doing really well and it's growing and you're really happy with its trajectory, don't change a thing. There are no hard and fast rules for these types of things. So like if things are going well, like just keep it going. If you look at your channel and you're like, yeah, like, no, this isn't where we want it to be. And when I say where you want it to be, like, if you're my type of personality, like, well, nothing's ever where I want it to be. Like, no, we don't mean it that way, Braid. What we mean is if it's like not in a great place, then you have more flexibility to make changes. Ideally, you'd have a podcast on its own channel compared to the church's channel, if it's not like sermon podcasts. And the reason for that is because YouTube has introduced podcast-specific features. 5 years ago, I wouldn't have felt as strongly as this. If you go back on the main Brady Shearer channel, you'll find podcasts on there. The Ask Brady Show, as an example, was on there exclusively. Why? Because at that point, YouTube didn't have a stake in the podcasting game. And so I didn't want to start a channel all the way from scratch.
Yeah.
Once YouTube came out with like podcasting specific features, like you can create a playlist that is a podcast and that can actually become its own RSS feed. And we knew that YouTube, as it saw Spotify kind of getting into the podcast game, YouTube was like, wait a minute, we need to also get into this game because who's better positioned to excel in the podcasting world than we are? When we started this channel about a year ago, almost exactly, we were like, we're going to start a channel for the podcast and it's going to be exclusive for this. Yes, we're going to have to start from scratch, but that also means that we can keep the two channels separate. And lo and behold, a year later, the Brady Shearer channel is dedicated to the Pro Church Tools Inc. now brand new series. And I would be not feeling great if that podcast was on that channel.
Right.
So depending on where you're at, I would let that dictate what you do. Likely, this church is not having an exploding YouTube channel. It's not having one that say, oh yeah, like I would not want anything to disrupt this growth. That's probably a better way of asking the question. If you look at your YouTube channel and your growth, quote unquote, was disrupted, would that be a problem for you? If you're like, well, no, like we're growing and I'm happy about this, I wouldn't recommend changing things because YouTube is not like other platforms. Sometimes you change something and they're like, tough for you. And you're like, why did you do this? this seems counterintuitive. And they're like, hey, sucks to suck. If you're like, no, I'm not happy with the growth on this YouTube channel, then you don't have as much to lose.
Yeah.
I'd be more open to change.
There you go. Okay, heard a rumor. You're going to be at SALT conference this year. What are your thoughts about going to Dallas, Texas? Dallas or Houston?
Dallas.
Dallas, Texas.
Yeah, SALT's mixing it up. SALT is, maybe the longest running communications conference for churches.
And you've been before.
Yeah, I think my first one was maybe 8 years ago, 9. I think 2015 was my first year at SALT. So, 9 years ago. And this is the first time I think they're leaving the Nashville area and they're going to be in Dallas. Yeah. So speaking at SALT again this year, I do a pretty good job of limiting speaking engagements so that Alex and I can go to cities and just eat. If we go to cities and speak, can we eat? Of course.
Right.
But we might want to go to a different city and eat. So I'm going there. Who knows? Will Alex be there? Will I be able to rope him into this? We're going to find out.
We survived Montreal.
We did survive Montreal. Did our family survive Montreal?
Yeah, my family's thriving.
Families are thriving. Yeah. Thriving? Okay, my family survived. So we'll be in SALT, be at SALT in Dallas. Very excited. I've been to Dallas once on my mission to visit right. every Major League Baseball ballpark. So got to see the Texas Rangers play just outside of Dallas. I had a good time in Dallas. Been to San Antonio, been to Dallas, been to Houston. Of those 3 cities, I'd rank them in order: Dallas, San Antonio, Houston.
Wow.
Of course, I haven't been to Austin, drove around it on the new bypass road that had been erected, 8 years ago when I was there. So my sense is Austin is a really good time and I would enjoy it, but haven't had the pleasure just yet. But
did you do the Texas food thing while you were there? Like, did you do barbecue?
Yeah. And our friend Jonathan Malm in San Antonio made sure to show us a really good time for barbecue. But who else has good barbecue? Nashville has some pretty good barbecue. I remember we were with a friend who was hosting us, part of SALT's leadership team, and they're like, I don't know where they took us, but it felt like we were in the bayou. I understand that Nashville is not Louisiana, but we're in this dense bush. I'm like, where are we going? And he's like, don't worry. And then suddenly this smoke cloud appears in the clearing, and there's this entire restaurant. So
amazing. Well, you know what Nashville doesn't have and what Texas does have?
What?
Is the other Brady Sticker.
Yes.
And he's really campaigning for me to join you on this trip because he wants to hunt hogs with me. So we'll see how that goes. See if we can make a vlog out of it.
Yeah, the problem is this is why I don't want you to come.
You're going to be at the conference speaking, asking me to do something. Where you'll be like, Alex, and I'm gone. I'm just in the bush hunting hogs.
He says that he captures the hogs to then hunt them.
They're an invasive species. They have to be removed from the ecosystem.
This is like if you go and
we need barbecue.
You go fishing at those ponds that have been stocked with ponds. The fish. That's what that is. How do you feel about stocked ponds?
I feel good about barbecue, and so if I could turn a feral hog into some barbecue,
this man stick to his values. He won't.
Next question: what is your daily workflow? So we're talking like apps, schedule, integrations, things that are making your life easier.
So for all company communication, we use Slack. That is one of my most used applications for sure. It's crazy. There, are 30 people in there, and we're just always chatting. For my notebooks, it's all in Evernote. Regrettably.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a shame.
Evernote used to be this joyous application 15 years ago, and now it's...
You watched me try to log in earlier.
We were trying to get some notes ready for this podcast.
Trying to do some work.
I use an app called Things as my daily to-do.
I saw you in Montreal. I saw you grab your phone because you needed... Something came up in conversation. You're like, oh, I need to write that down.
Yeah, and it was record mock call for social sermons.
The speed at which you... What I was impressed with was when you... opened the app, which I didn't get to see what it was because you hit it so fast. It brought you right to where you needed to be to start doing the thing that you were there to do. And I took note of that. I was like, oh, that was an impressive little note-taking experience. It's called Things.
It's called Things, and its entire pitch is the simplest to-do app that exists.
There you go.
And so all my reminders are in here. Like if I'm on a call with a church and they're like, you know what, we're not ready to jump into social sermons just now, but in 3 months we will. Like, can you message us then? I'm like, sure. I just put it in here. This is kind of like, I look at my to-do app to be like, all right, what are these the little things? Mm-hmm. It's not my calendar. It's my to-do. So right now I have to send a newsletter email to let some churches know about some downtime for a third-party application we use. I have to create my daughter's summer schedule because school's about to end real quick here. And then I also have to get a photographer for a region that we do not yet have one. those are kind of my 3 free floating items. And then what I'll do is when I have like a lot of like different creative work to do, I will structure it by the day. So I have 2 creative items to do tomorrow. One of them involves you.
Okay.
So I know you're excited for that.
All right.
And then 3 of them are for Friday. And, one of them is like return the TV equipment because we switched providers.
Right.
Reapply for the health card application for my youngest. Like hers needs I gotta send out that paperwork. So it's just that.
Is there any like delineation between personal and work in there? Like color
those things
coding
exist,
lists?
but I purposefully don't do that.
Right.
I also have a lot of good systems, and by systems, I mean employees, that keep things from me.
Yeah.
Like, I saw a fellow entrepreneur, and he showed, like, his home screen right before we got on this call on, like, a tweet. I don't know if it was a brag or, like, a confession, but, like, it was, like, email, 18,000. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I have 4 emails open right now.
Right.
And those 4 just got removed because they were all like a shirt I bought arrived.
Yeah. What mail app do you use?
I use Airmail.
Okay.
It's fine.
Yeah.
What do you use?
I just use the Apple mail app.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I love about Airmail is it does have the ability to snooze. And I don't know if surely Apple Mail has these things now, yeah. But I got this, 10 years ago.
I remember it was like one of the first waiting list apps.
Yeah.
Where it was like join or like, enter your code to whatever to sign up for Airmail.
So if I go into snooze, I have, our parking pass from this weekend. I can remove that. I have upcoming flights. I have upcoming dining reservations at different places. Our booking is reserved for the walking tour in Old Town Montreal. Can remove that. And then I can also set reminders, which is nice. So like, I don't like looking at emails. I like being in inbox 0. Mm-hmm. I am at inbox 0 almost all the time. So I'll set, if an email is in there too long, I'm like, this is actionable in a little while. I can set a reminder and then it'll pop back up in a week or 2. And then I'll be like, yes, now nice. I can take care of you. Google Calendar for calendar. What about you? Jump in.
Apple Calendar, Notion for work and personal stuff.
I have Notion for work and personal as well.
Yeah, a lot of our collaborative, because we have different teams in different areas. We don't all work in this office. A lot of our like cross-team collaboration happens in Notion, and it actually this has been a move we made over the last year or so, taking some of that collaboration out of Slack and into like a more visible database like Notion. And it's been really helpful for us. It's like really synchronized all of our efforts. And I mean, we talk about church websites, how your church should be the single place for every next step that your church members can take in your church. And like that's kind of what Notion is for us. It's like, what's going on at Pro Church Tools? Well, it's all here. Slack is just for memes for the most part now.
I have my habits of joy in Notion. I have my wardrobe inventory in Notion. I have our growth tracker numbers in Notion. I have all of my content creation tracking in Notion. Newsletter, blog, YouTube, podcast, TikTok and Reels, carousels, content and marketing ideas, archive. At the end of the year, they all get sent to the archive and we start fresh again. And then we have Trello.
Yeah. Old faithful.
The number of times a department or an employee or a manager has tried to get us off Trello, to which I've said, you can get out of this company, but you come second to Trello in this company.
Yeah. I use a lot of the Apple like native apps. Like for my notes, I'm using the Notes app. For mail, I'm using Mail. For calendar, I'm using Calendar.
Oh.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, and Maps too.
Maps.
Although Apple Maps apparently is like,
great.
hey, it came back. Isn't it funny how like these apps that are just around forever, they kind of like have these cycles? Like for a while, Apple Maps was like not it. And now like the Waze users are even saying like Apple Maps has like, they've resurrected. Yeah. They've come back.
That's right. Oh, I just recently added the New York Times Games app to my phone. I don't play games, but I play Wordle and Connections every day.
Yeah.
And I didn't know they had an app.
Those are games.
And so, but I was doing them in browser. So I had 2 tabs open and I did it every day. And then I don't know, I think on Twitter, I came across it. I was like, they have an app. Of course they do. And so it's not like I have notifications turned on for it or anything, but both the games are now in the app.
Are you wearing a fragrance today? Mm-hmm. Is it the first time in this room I can smell your fragrance?
It's so funny you just said that. See, people are going to think this is scripted, and it's not. Because the next question...
There's no question about fragrances.
The next question that comes in and says, I need an update. Is Alex still smelling like a pedestrian?
What?
Or have you come through and found a fragrance for this humble pastor to wear?
Did you add questions without showing me?
The answer is yes. The man came through and I am wearing a fragrance called Number 8 from a fragrance house in Iceland of all places called I mean, it's Icelandic. I'm going to try. It's called Fishersund, I think. Father's Day. So I don't know how many weeks ago now. Rebecca, for 6 weeks, 8 weeks up to Father's Day, she kept saying, "Can I give you your Father's Day present?" I'm like, "No, thanks."
Yeah, because we had it in the mix for
So you had been cooking, you and Rebecca. You guys are always texting about stuff, and you had been cooking, and unbeknownst to me. And Father's Day comes around, I start opening it, and I can smell it right away. And I'm like, I'm not. We've talked about this on the show. I'm not like sentimental about birthdays and such, marking moments. And much less about gifts. Like I don't know. It's just not my gift. But I'm not going to forget this moment. Like unpacking these fragrances. She got me a tester kit, 3 different fragrances. Number 8, number 101, and one called Utility Kit. And okay, what happened right away was I sneezed.
Yeah,
I sneezed twice.
It didn't start good.
And she looked at me and I was like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I'm sneezing because of the fragrances. I open it up. My throat starts itching. My ear starts itching. I'm like, shoot, I'm allergic to one of these. And it's because they're all natural. You did what I asked you to do. They're all natural. They're from Iceland. It's where my spirit lives, I think. And I haven't had an allergic reaction since. So I think it was just first exposure. But I'm wearing number 8, and I pulled it up because this is for the listeners. You've done enough of this. It's my turn. These are the notes for this fragrance. Brand new sneakers. Crushing fresh flower stalks against hot asphalt. Mouth full of lemon candy and fingers sticky with motor oil. Stolen rhubarb this is crazy. Stolen rhubarb from a neighbor's garden. Peeled, slathered in honey, and then chewed on. Orange cake crumble in the pocket of freshly washed clothes. Arctic wind blowing through hair in a damp pine forest. So, yes, I'm wearing a fragrance, and that's what I smell like today. Thank you for that.
Alex and I went to a coffee shop this weekend, like we do, and he points out a bag of coffee, and he says, "You want to know what the tasting notes on this coffee are?" I remember 2 of the 3. Starbursts.
Yeah. That's the 2 I remember too.
And
Starbursts. It might have been passion fruit.
And the summer of '69.
Yes.
And if you think coffee tasting notes are verbose, a bit over the
crazy.
top. The Fragrantica world is just different. And that's why it made so much sense for Alex to get into this. Because, we'd have a sip of wine and he'd be like calling out notes and we'd be like, whoa! Like that's just what he's great at. I do not have this skill, that my palate is not refined to that degree. And he would say something about, oh my gosh, that's exactly it. And then here I am living in the world of fragrance and he can't either because of values and or sensory experience and allergies. And so it was really great for us to find this where you were able to step into your anointing. And you know what? As I'm saying,
I feel like an adult now. I feel like I know who I am all of a sudden.
Butter versus oil?
Stop.
What are you anointing people with, butter boy?
It's oil. We know this.
You can't anoint with butter.
That's true. We'll talk about that on a future show. The only thing about this, I asked Rebecca, so it's 3 little test bottles, 5 mils each. I said, like, how much was this? She said it was $70. I was like, oh, easy. So I like number 8 the best.
Yeah, you've
at least right
that.
now. It's like I love the other 2, but for the season for summer, it's the brightest. So I go to the website and it's $250 for a 50 ml bottle. So that's going to be a problem for me.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
But I'll figure it out.
If you want to see my fragrance summer rotation, it's in the second episode of the Pro Church Tools Inc. series. Yeah, that video is titled Church Website Red Flags. I'm watching Church Website Red Flags. I'm learning a lot. Boom! Fragrances.
I'm in Brady's closet. Any Icelandic fragrances in there?
No, but I mean, we might have to make another trip just to, hey, Rebecca, if you buy it in Iceland.
No shipping.
And no duty.
There we go. Okay, next question. Yeah, I snuck that one in there. Next question from an actual listener.
You sure about that?
Can you talk about burnout? We touched on it a little bit.
We've talked about it before.
Would you call that burnout? Or were there like any shades of burnout?
No. I don't think it'd be fair to call that burnout. I think that would be like a crisis of priorities.
Okay.
Where the history of my professional and personal life to that point would have been most of the areas of my life are having their needs yet. 1 or 2 areas are being neglected. And then eventually you're like, oh, this part of my life is being neglected. I need to give it attention. and then one of the other areas becomes neglected. It's like if you're juggling and every time you go to catch a ball, you drop another, and then you start again. Like, I'm not going to drop that one this time, and then you drop another. And so I had to completely reapproach it, and that was what was so rewarding out of the pandemic, because I was able to suddenly have more margin than ever before. And so I didn't have to like learn to juggle, let's say 6 balls.
Right.
They're like, just here's 3.
Yeah.
Can you juggle these? I was like, I can juggle these. Okay. Now that you figured out, we're going to add one more. Okay. Just one. It's like, okay. We're not going to add another. Do that for a year. Okay. We're going to add one more and then slowly build up. I talk about the 3 C's for social sermons. There's the 3 C's for leadership as well, which is character, competency, and capacity. And that was a capacity issue. It was like, I can handle this. I know what I'm doing. And it's not like I'm like leading a life of sin while I'm doing it, but I don't have the capacity to juggle all these things at once. And every time one is getting dropped. And so I had to focus on like, okay, my character is here. My competency is here. And my competency is actually greater than my capacity. So even though I'm capable, I'm not capable of doing all the things. So I had to purposely remove those things. And when I say purposely, it was really kind of accidental because the pandemic forced it. And, you know, hey, thank God for the pandemic.
Well, I mean, that's like, you talk about that in your personal life and your business life, but that's the experience that so many churches and like church staff and volunteers had as well, which was, we went through this collective global experience where in some way, shape, or form, like public worship was interrupted, likely for the first time ever in any of our lives, and certainly in that way. And you said it earlier, it gave us the opportunity to like ask some probing questions that we didn't have the opportunity to ask before. And so for us at our church and in my own life, like I wasn't burned out, but when you take all that stuff away and you realize like, oh, this is what Sunday feels like for folks who don't go to church. Like everyone gets 2 Saturdays. This is what this feels like. And so you get to do some reevaluating, but thank God that the way we rebuilt from that, and it sounds to mirror your experience as well, like the way we rebuilt from that as a church and church staff and volunteers in our church wasn't like a light switch. It didn't get flipped back on the way it got flipped off. It was like slow and steady with now the awareness that like, oh, some things were out of whack here, out of proportion. So how do we move forward in health to ensure that like we don't get ourselves in that position again, like feeling overworked but not completely burnt out? I haven't experienced a season of burnout like that, and I really do, like, at least right now, I'm pretty confident I'm building a rhythm of life that shields me from that.
I feel the same way.
And that's like, that takes a little bit of self-awareness. It takes a lot of like spiritual discipline. Like it takes like a really like
Right.
Serious and robust idea of like what Sabbath is and how important it is. And so like if you take that as seriously as I believe like most of Christian tradition has taken it, then like I think you build that into your life and it shields you from falling into the trap of burning out, which is a symptom of a type of culture that like is not really Christian. It's not a Christian ethic that drives that type of like way of living. So I think I flirted with that a little bit at a time in my life where I was young enough to not be burnt out, but old enough to like see the signs, and hopefully learned from that in my youth to build a rhythm of life that like shields me from that, hopefully in perpetuity.
Yeah, you know, I was taking inventory of my schedule just last week before we went off to Montreal. The week before that, I had a full week at home, and I was like, you know what? How much am I working right now? And so I took a work log throughout the entire week, and I added it all up, because this is not a busy season, much like churches. Mm-hmm. When y'all go on vacation, we also like take things a bit easier. Mm-hmm. And I was like, yeah, okay, I worked 25 hours this week. And I was like, that is the right amount for me as a business owner in the down season, because in the up seasons, it's 50 hours. And I built this business from the beginning because I didn't want to work to live.
Right.
I didn't want to live to work.
Yeah.
I did want to work to live.
Yeah.
Mess that up.
Yeah.
And so like, I was like, good, I'm in line. Like those are the right amount of hours. And then I was like, okay, in those 25 hours, what am I doing? And I had them all written down, what I was doing. And I was like, okay, there are a couple of things that I'd like to delegate. And this is that season where I'm not as focused on like the next big project, he says, after he just launched a brand new YouTube video series. And so this is the time where I'm like, okay, this is on my plate. How do we get it on somebody else's plate? This is being neglected because I'm having to do this. That's silly. This should get more time. And I kind of like refocus. And so like you said, building up the right spiritual disciplines and rhythms to basically protect you from this in the future. That's a big part of avoiding burnout. If you're in a season where you don't feel like that's happening, how are you protecting against a future season like that? Because something goes wrong, something changes dramatically, the emergency fund, the coffers burst, whatever it might be, and suddenly you're in a place where, oh, I wasn't in a season of burnout, but like that wisdom of scripture in that one verse, like I also was walking in a path where I felt like I was on stable ground, but I was slipping. And now you are in that position. And so when you're in the seasons of plenty, what do the great farmers and harvesters do? They're stockpiling for the seasons of famine. They're stockpiling for the seasons of winter. This is the harvest. We're putting it in the giant grain silo. We're gonna have all the grain in the silo.
Yeah, sounds about right to
Okay,
me.
good.
Yeah.
Grain in the silo.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do. You gotta stack that bread.
And you and I have both, we haven't done it well, but we did it ultimately. Part of the key to this for you and I was to like choose to listen to folks, and by folks I mean our spouses,
Sure.
who were saying something. I didn't listen to Rebecca the first time she said like, you're working too much. Or like, this is too much for our family. I'm feeling this way because you're not here. You're not this, that, and the other. I didn't listen to her to the first time. I eventually clued in and listened to her. And it took that self-awareness, that moment of humility to like actually, bring us into a place where we like chose to make a change that now has like, now we're living in the fruit of that. And we really avoided a disaster. It took her speaking up, but it took me like choosing to listen. I know you've had like similar experiences. And so that like, that's true for anyone listening, which is like, if the people closest in your life are like telling you like you're working too much, or regardless of if you feel like you can handle it or not, or if you're always getting this, like, how do you do it all? It's like, that's a little bit of a yellow flag. It's like, well, maybe I should be paying attention to this. It takes a measure of humility, and you're probably not going to get it right because we all have egos. We all like to feel important and stuff, but yeah, that's what it took for me.
Final thing I'll say is that the rhythm of expanding and contracting is important. I think people might listen to what I have to say and assume like, oh, Brady's life is very regimented. He follows a very precise routine. That is true, except for I frequently go on trips to basically obliterate that routine on purpose. And in my family, like, it is understood that like trips for us are incredibly, incredibly important for a couple of reasons. One, we want to basically like contract after like we've expanded for a very long time. Think of it like an elastic. You cannot just keep expanding, it will snap. You need to expand and contract. Every time you expand and contract, the ability to expand more the next time increases. So Alex and I getting away for the weekend it accomplishes two things. One, it completely refreshes my perspective on life, and it obliterates my routine. There was nothing about this past weekend that I would normally be what I would do. And then I come back and I feel two things. One, why do I travel? I'm exhausted. I need to like get back into my regular routine and just like, and then I'm really excited to be home and excited to be back in the routine because I guarantee you something's gonna happen within 3 weeks, and that thing is gonna be like, I need to get away. And that's why I always have like a trip on the schedule for like, okay, I gotta get to there, and that's my rhythm. That seems to work for our family. And that might not necessarily be your thing, but you certainly have a thing that you can get away to. You know, when Alex wasn't traveling, what he was doing was he was going out for these like hunts in the morning where it's extremely silent and he's just sitting there with his own thoughts. And that was like a physical and a mental break. For you, whatever type of recreational thing that you get into, that is important. Don't think that you're a robot. Don't listen to this and be like, Brady just shows up and he fills out his checklist every single day and like he just keeps doing that indefinitely. I do, but there's always a break coming, and I kind of like that. It's like, put me in the game. This is a hockey metaphor. Nice. You do your shift and then you sit back down and then you go out and you skate, right? There's a lot of skating.
That's it. You got
and then you get up and you take a break, right? Expand, contract.
Next question. We're a small team. It's common for us to juggle several roles currently. As we work on creating a robust team, as well as on staff and at the church, with an eye towards future planning, I wonder if you might be able to share some insights. I know that you manage a team of 20 plus across different creative and communication departments, that is. Could you describe what an ideal, well-structured administrative team would look like on a church organization chart, with particular emphasis on communication areas? Good luck.
That's a tall task.
Yeah.
So the way that we've done it at this size is there's basically 3 levels. So there's me, and then there are the people directly below me. Alex would be an example of that. And then there are the people that are below Alex. And sometimes it's people, sometimes it's responsibilities or like branches. So what I've done is started with me. And maybe the best way to answer this question is to think about how this evolves. So if you are overseeing communications in your church, you're likely one person. And at one point, you do everything. And eventually you realize that either you're doing too much and it's not sustainable, or you'd like to do more, but you can't. So what happens? Usually it starts with like an outsourcing of something, or like a part-time helper or a volunteer. Mm-hmm. And so let's imagine that one of the things that you oversee is like the books. Okay, the books are my responsibility. I'm gonna like hire a firm and outsource this. This happens all the time with social sermons in the creative capacity. A church comes to us and they say, this is our like creative person. And like they're spending a lot of their time like making sermon reels because we think that's important, but like it's the same thing over and over, week after week, and it takes a ton of time. I'm like, yeah, it really does. And they're like, we'd like to hire you, outsource it to you for a fraction of the cost of what we could hire someone for. And then that frees up their time to do things. Okay, so suddenly you've created now like a system that's beyond just one person. You have one person plus an outsourcing. Eventually, you get to one person managing a volunteer team or 2 full-time people. And now you can kind of go from a bit of a generalist to a bit more contextual. Okay, I excel in these areas, you excel in these areas, and then you begin to manage people. And that's when you begin delegating. And the way that we've always done that here is we create standard operating procedures. Mm-hmm. So to use the makeover project as an example, I came up with the idea for makeovers, I came up with the vision for it, I then came up with the plan to execute it. So I did the first ones exclusively by myself. And then once I had done it, I took one part of it and I created a standard operating procedure. It's nothing sexy. It's a Google Doc. It goes, step 1, do this thing. Step 2, do this thing. Sometimes there's a video loom attached, mm-hmm. which is a favorite of the people in this office. They love when I send them looms. And the loom is, of course, me screen recording and talking through what I'm doing as I do it. Then I take that piece of the big project and I hand it off. And then I work on the other pieces of the project. Eventually, I hand that one off, and then I hand that other one off. We've gotten to the point now where, for the first time, the makeover project is going to be handled completely by the team. Mm-hmm. So they will receive the applications, approve the applications, book the photographer, coordinate between the church and the photographer to get that date booked, to get the photos back, build the entire website as part of the makeover, then prepare the presentation for the church. And the final piece that we have yet to offboard, but is coming next for the first time, is the makeover builders in this office are going to be delivering on calls to those churches. Mm-hmm. To this point, I've still been doing those calls because it's the final piece of the process that I've yet to kind of work out. And then I create the script, I create the loom, I create the standard operating procedure, I hand it off to them, and they begin doing that. And now that leaves me in the position of just vision casting and people management and figuring out like what are the biggest problems here that need to be fixed. And now there's kind of that 3-tier level. So hopefully there's value in that answer. I would not pose as an expert for org charts. Perhaps my very, very good friend Justin would be the better pastor to answer that because he is the pastor at a large church and he does org charts all day and night. That's how we've gone from like one person, just me, to like a team of 30, and how we've structured the different roles within. You could also just get an Alex, and anytime you don't want to do something, you just go, Alex. No, that's not how I treat Alex. Come on.
A lot of those tools that we mentioned earlier, Slack, Loom, Trello, Notion, they are like really the binding pieces that like hold the collaboration of like a team that size together, you know? Because we've tried everything, right? Like we've tried all of the tools.
Sure.
And so like finding one that functions for you really well actually shouldn't be understated as to like the success of collaborative projects or like even just like team communication. Like finding one that really works for everyone can be a really important part of like your success as a team, or at least how everyone feels about the work they're doing while they're doing it.
Sure.
Next question. Hi, I have a question. We've been following you for a while on Instagram and YouTube. We are an unprogrammed Quaker meeting in Baltimore, which means we don't have clergy or sermons. No sermon, no recording of the impromptu messages that may be spoken out of our silence means we don't have anything to grab 30 to 90 second sermon clips for our weekly content. What other content would you suggest we develop for our No Weeks Off foundation material? I'm building up a quote bank, making static graphics of those, as well as photos and short videos of people in action and around our building, mostly meant for B-roll. I'm not sure what to source for 1 to 2 reels per week. That doesn't feel sustainable for us. Hoping you can help make it seem less out of reach.
Ooh.
To the Quakers.
Love the Quakers. So this person's off to a very good start with what they have gathered so far. My first thought is congruency. It's not congruent for you to be doing like sermon reel type videos online because that would make no sense for what you're doing in person. Online should reflect in person the principle of congruency. So I would say the foundation becomes those photos of church life. And then what are like the emphases of your specific in-person service? And then how can we mirror that online? Obviously, the gathering of people becomes a big part of that. Maybe your church is really invested in service projects, and visuals and videos from that become very important. Obviously, worship plays a role in every incarnational community. That doesn't mean like music necessarily. Yeah. So how is worship practice in this community, and how does that carry over to social? This isn't doable for every church, but what we see with some churches is like just clips from their worship do extremely well on social. Those are obviously not taken from sermons, and that could be translated to your context in the way that you do worship.
Yeah, just a couple weeks ago, we did an episode called Social Media for Rural Churches.
Correct.
And I talked about how I'm doing this at my own church, which is a similar context in which like we don't record our sermons for reasons. And so, but also acknowledging that like we believe and affirm that like there is really great merit in short form video on social media. So we're doing the quote posts, we're doing static images, but finding creative ways to supplement our short form video quota by just using our iPhones to like tell the story of what we're doing at a church and as a church. So exactly what you're describing, you know, like I've talked at length already about our Beehive campaign we're doing at our church. And like those have been the most successful videos. It's just something that's going on at our church and we're just documenting it with our iPhone.
When you say Beehive campaign, are you referring to the newsletter app that we use at Pro Church Tools?
No, I'm not.
No, okay.
No,
because we were talking about tools before.
Yes,
so.
yeah, we use Beehive to send our newsletter. Actually, the bees did get delivered last night. 8 hives.
I wouldn't know. I haven't seen a reel yet.
I haven't been there yet because I have a job. I'm here doing it.
That's the excuses.
No, the bees had to get delivered at night because during the day they're out working. They have to come back to the hive at night. I learned that last night.
Probably should include that in the reel.
Yeah, I will. Ed, the beekeeper, said as we signed off the phone call, he said, "And the stings are free," and then a little like chuckle.
How many times do you think he's made that joke?
I don't know, but it landed for me. So I laughed out loud. I was like, "Thanks, Ed. That was clever."
Reminds me of the train patrol agent who was like,
yes. The first time I made this joke, like, how many times have you made this joke today?
I mean, you have your routine.
And he was great.
He was.
Yeah. Next question. For
No more questions. No more questions. We're going to save those for, it's gone long enough. We're going to save those for the next episode, next month of Bro Church Tools. But we appreciate your questions. If you want your question answered on a future episode, the way many of these were delivered was in the comments below this YouTube video. Otherwise, we'll talk to you next Wednesday. Thanks as always for your time, attention, and trust. Talk to you soon.
Wow.
TikTok's my favorite. I'll post them and be like, here's a study. This is the average amount churches spend. And then the first comment, that's untrue. Okay.
But I quoted the study.
Okay.